Chapter 19. The Law of Timing. When to lead is as important as what to do and where to go. If ever there was an example of the importance of timing as it relates to leadership, it came in New Orleans in late August and early September of 2005. New Orleans is an unusual city. Like Venice, Italy, it is surrounded by water. To the north lies Lake Pontchartrain. To the south flows the mighty Mississippi River. To the east and west are low-lying swamplands. Canals crisscross the city. You cannot drive into or out of New Orleans without crossing a major bridge. That may not seem like a big deal until you consider that most of the city lies below sea level. New Orleans is shaped like a bowl. On average, the city is 6 feet below sea level. In the lowest areas, it's 9 feet below sea level. And the land in New Orleans sinks a little more every year. For decades, citizens have worried about the potential damage that a direct hit from a powerful hurricane could do to the city. Disaster on the horizon. On Wednesday, August 24th, 2005, nobody in New Orleans could have known that the newly formed tropical storm named Katrina would be the big one, the hurricane the city had feared would someday come. It wasn't until Friday that the National Hurricane Center predicted that the storm would reach landfall on Monday somewhere near Barris, Louisiana, about 60 miles southeast of New Orleans. The hurricane was already looking like a bad one. The next morning, Saturday, August 27th, the leaders of many of Louisiana's parishes around New Orleans ordered mandatory evacuations. St. Charles, Plaquemines, part of Jefferson, and even St. Tammany, which is situated on higher ground north of New Orleans. But what about New Orleans? Why didn't Mayor Ray Nagin, the leader of the city, order a mandatory evacuation at the same time? Many people say New Orleanians are fatalistic and they can't be made to move any faster than they want to go. Others say that Nagin, a businessman before he was elected, was worried about the legal and financial implications of an evacuation. I say he and others in the government didn't understand the law of timing. When to lead is as important as what to do and where to go. The time to move people out of New Orleans was when the other parish leaders announced the mandatory evacuations. Nagin waited. On Saturday evening, he finally announced a voluntary evacuation of New Orleans. Only after Max Mayfield, the director of the National Hurricane Center, called Nagin on Saturday night did the mayor become concerned enough to act. Max scared the crap out of me, Nagin is reported to have said after the call. Too little, too late. The next morning, at 9 o'clock, Nagin finally ordered a mandatory evacuation, fewer than 24 hours before the hurricane would make landfall. It was much too late for many citizens of New Orleans. And how did he plan to help those people who couldn't make it out of town on such short notice? He advised them to get to the Superdome, the city's shelter of last resort, however they could. But he made no real provisions for them. In a press conference, Nagin advised, if you can't leave the city and you have to come to the Superdome, come with enough food, non-perishable items to last for 3 to 5 days. Come with blankets, with pillows, no weapons, no alcohol, no drugs. You know, this is like the governor said. You're going on a camping trip. If you don't know what that's like, just bring enough stuff for you to be able to sleep and be comfortable. It's not going to be the best environment, but at least you will be safe. The results of Nagin's leadership played out in the national coverage of Katrina and its aftermath. Water was flowing into parts of the city by 9 o'clock Monday morning. Conditions for the people at the Superdome were dreadful. Other people who couldn't get out of town flocked to the convention center. Many citizens were stranded on rooftops. How did Nagin respond? He complained to the media at press conferences. Another chance. If someone was going to step in and lead, it would have to occur somewhere other than the local level. Most people began looking to the federal government for leadership, but they violated the law of timing too. Not until Wednesday, August 31st, did Director of Homeland Security Michael Chertoff release a memo declaring Katrina an incident of national significance, a key designation needed to trigger swift federal coordination. President Bush didn't meet with his cabinet until the following day to determine how to launch the White House task force on Hurricane Katrina response. Meanwhile, the people stranded in New Orleans waited for help. On Thursday, September 1st, the Red Cross requested permission to take water, food, and supplies to the people who were stranded in the city, but the request was denied by the Louisiana Office of Homeland Security. They were asked to wait another day. Finally, on Sunday, September 4th, 6 days after New Orleans flooded, the evacuation of the Superdome was finally complete. The way Katrina was handled shows leadership timing at its worst. It was botched at every level. Even the local animal shelter did better than the mayor. 2 days prior to Katrina's arrival, it evacuated hundreds of animals to Houston, Texas. In the end, more than 1,836 people died as a result of the hurricane. 1,577 of those people were from Louisiana. 80% of the deaths in Louisiana occurred in Orleans and St. Bernard parishes, with the overwhelming majority occurring in New Orleans. If the leaders had paid greater attention not only to what they did, but also to when they did it, many more lives would have been saved. Timing is everything. Good leaders recognize that when to lead is as important as what to do and where to go. Timing is often the difference between success and failure in an endeavor. Every time a leader makes a move, there are really only 4 outcomes. 1. The wrong action at the wrong time leads to disaster. A leader who takes the wrong action at the wrong time is sure to suffer negative repercussions. That is certainly the case in New Orleans as Katrina approached. Nagin's poor leadership set in motion a series of wrong actions at the wrong time. He waited until it was too late to call for a mandatory evacuation. He sent faxes to local churches hoping they would help with evacuating people, but by the time he did so, the people who would have received the faxes were already long gone. He picked a poor location for the shelter of last resort, neglected to supply it properly, and failed to provide adequate transportation for people to get there. One wrong action after another led to disaster. Obviously, the stakes for every leadership decision are not as high as they were for Mayor Nagin. But every leadership situation requires that leaders heed the law of timing. If you lead a department or a small team and you take the wrong action at the wrong time, your people will suffer, and so will your leadership. 2. The right action at the wrong time brings resistance. When it comes to good leadership, having a vision for the direction of the organization or team and knowing how to get there aren't enough. If you take the right action but do it at the wrong time, you may still be unsuccessful because the people you lead can become resistant. Good leadership timing requires many things. Understanding. Leaders must have a firm grasp on the situation. Maturity. If leaders' motives aren't right, their timing will be off. Confidence. People will follow leaders who know what must be done. Decisiveness. Wishy-washy leaders create wishy-washy followers. Experience. If leaders don't possess experience, then they need to gain wisdom from others who do possess it. Intuition. Timing often depends on intangibles, such as momentum and morale. Preparation. If the conditions aren't right, leaders must create those conditions. I've had my share of blunders in the area of timing. One in particular that stands out was my attempts to introduce a small group program at Skyline, my church in San Diego. It was the right thing to do at the church, but it failed miserably. Why? The timing was wrong. We were trying to do this back in the early 1980s, and there weren't many leaders with experience in this area, so we were playing it by ear. But most important, the church wasn't prepared for it. We didn't understand that the success or failure of a small group launch depended on how many leaders had been developed to support it. For a few years, we tried to make it work with the system we had introduced, but ultimately it failed. It wasn't until 6 years later that we got it to work. After shutting down the original system, training leaders, and starting over again. The second time around, it was very successful. 3. The wrong action at the right time is a mistake. People who are naturally entrepreneurial often possess a strong sense of timing. They intuitively know when it's time to make a move, to seize an opportunity. They sometimes make mistakes in their actions at those key moments. My brother Larry, who is an excellent businessman, has coached me in this area. Larry says that the greatest mistake made by entrepreneurs and other people in business is knowing when to cut their losses and when to increase their investment to maximize their gains. Their mistakes come from taking the wrong action at the right time. Once again, I have experience in this area. Because I'm known primarily as a communicator, for years people tried to talk me into doing a radio program. For a long time, I resisted the idea. In the mid-1990s, however, I could see there was a need for a growth-oriented program for people of faith. So we decided to create a program called Growing Today. The problem was the format. Most programs of that type are supported by donations, but I believe in free market economics. I wanted the program to support itself by selling products, the way any other commercial program would do. What a mistake. The show never broke even. It was the right time, but the wrong idea. The law of timing had spoken again. 4. The right action at the right time results in success. When the right leader and the right timing come together, incredible things happen. An organization achieves its goals, reaps incredible rewards, and gains momentum. Success almost becomes inevitable. If you look at the history of nearly any organization, you will find a pivotal moment when the right leader took the right action at the right time, and it transformed the organization. Winston Churchill, whose greatness and leadership depended on the law of timing, described the impact that leaders can make and the satisfaction they can experience when they take the right action at the right time. He said, "There comes a special moment in everyone's life, a moment for which that person was born. That special opportunity, when he seizes it, will fulfill his mission, a mission for which he is uniquely qualified. In that moment, he finds greatness. It is his finest hour. Every leader desires to experience that moment." The crucible of war displays the law of timing. When the stakes are high, the consequences of the law of timing are dramatic and immediate. That is certainly true in war. In any major battle, the critical importance of timing becomes evident. The Battle of Gettysburg during the American Civil War is a prime example. When Confederate General Robert E. Lee took the Army of Northern Virginia until Pennsylvania in late June of 1863, he had 3 goals. 1. Draw the Union Army out of Virginia. 2. Resupply his troops using Pennsylvania's resources. And 3. Bring the fighting to the heart of the enemy territory, thereby prodding the Union Army into hasty and unwanted action. It was the 3rd year of the war, and both the Union and the Confederacy were growing weary of the conflict. Lee hoped his actions would bring an end to the conflict. Several days prior to the battle, Lee told General Trimble, "Our army is in good spirits, not over-fatigued, and can be concentrated on any one point in 24 hours or less. I have not yet heard that the enemy have crossed the Potomac, and am waiting to hear from General Stuart. When they hear where we are, they will make forced marches. They will come up, broken down from hunger and hard marching, strung out on a long line, and much demoralized when they come into Pennsylvania. I shall throw an overwhelming force on their advance, crush it, follow up the success, drive one corps back on another, and by successive repulses and surprises, before they can concentrate, create a panic and virtually destroy the army." Lee was trying to seize the opportunity for overwhelming victory. He didn't know until the morning of July 1st that the Union Army had already moved north. By then, some of its forces were already engaging Confederate troops on the Chambersburg Road, west of Gettysburg. That development disrupted Lee's strategy and ruined his timing. Lee's first instinct was to hold back and wait for his army's full strength to assemble before forcing a major engagement. But always conscious of the importance of timing, he recognized when his troops had a sudden advantage. As Lee watched from a nearby ridge, he saw that Federal troops were being routed and retreating. There was still a chance to take action that could lead to victory. Confederate forces would attack and seize the high ground of Cemetery Hill, defended only by a few Union infantry, reserves, and artillery. If they could capture and control that position, Lee reasoned, they would control the whole area. It would be the key to the Confederate victory and possibly bring an end to the war. In position to take that hill was Confederate General R.S. Ewell. It was still early in the day, and if Ewell moved forward, he could take it. But instead of pressing his advantage when the time was right and engaging the enemy, Ewell simply watched. He let the opportunity slip away, and the Confederates didn't take Cemetery Hill. By the next morning, Union troops had reinforced their previous positions, and the South's chance was gone. The Northern and Southern armies fought for 2 more days, but in the end, Lee's forces suffered defeat, having lost about 33,000 of his 76,300 men to injury or death. Their only choice was to retreat and make their way back to Virginia. Another opportunity lost. After the South's defeat, Lee expected the Union forces under the leadership of General Meade to immediately pursue a counterattack and utterly destroy his reeling army. That was also the expectation of Abraham Lincoln after he received the news of the Union's victory at Gettysburg. Anxious to make the most of the law of timing, Lincoln sent a communication from Washington, D.C. to Meade via General Halleck on July 7, 1863. In it, Halleck said, "We have certain information that Vicksburg surrendered to General Grant on the 4th of July. Now, if General Meade can complete his work so gloriously prosecuted thus far by the literal and substantial destruction of Lee's army, the rebellion will be over." Lincoln recognized that the timing was right. The Union army could crush what was left of the Confederate forces and could end the war. But just as the Southern forces did not seize the moment for victory when it was available for them, neither did the Northern counterparts. Meade took his time following up his victory at Gettysburg, and he didn't pursue Lee aggressively enough. He was content to let the Confederates run, stating that his goal was to drive from our soil every vestige of the presence of the invader. When Lincoln heard that, his response was, "My God, is that all?" Lincoln knew he was seeing the Union's chance slip away, and he was right. What remains of the Army of Northern Virginia crossed over the Potomac, escaping destruction, and the war continued for almost 2 more years, and hundreds of thousands of troops died. Lincoln later said that Meade's efforts had reminded him of an old woman trying to shoo her geese across a creek. Leaders from both sides had known what to do to achieve victory, but they failed to follow through at the critical moment. Reading a situation and knowing what to do are not enough to make you succeed in leadership. If you want your organization, department, or team to move forward, you must pay attention to timing. Only the right action at the right time will bring success. Anything else exacts a high price. No leader could escape the law of timing.